Folks, this year's Winnipeg Jets team has found that resiliency remains one of its best traits. But when it comes to contributions up and down the lineup, it's important to kind of take a look at who's leading the charge, which players have been the most prolific, and which players might be holding the Jets back a little bit in their current form. We'll go through the forwards and the defense, and then preview some of Winnipeg's upcoming games later this week on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
Or Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, if you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Megaphone, Odyssey, and YouTube. Doing so is completely free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. But most of all, we just really love and appreciate your support. Now, talking about the Jets, obviously Winnipeg has had an interesting start to the year. You might say it's a mixed bag. I think Garrett Hull, who has worked with plenty of statistical analysis and zone entry tracking and stuff, and has tracked a number of events for the Jets this year, I think his assessment is spot on with where this team is at, in that they're improving in areas, but cumulatively, it's still a work in progress, right? We're not really seeing a net change yet, just because Winnipeg kind of varies between extremes of being really good and being really bad. Now, I'll say that they're a much more entertaining team to watch, so I think that alone is an improvement. I think the body language is way better. The vibes seem to be super up. It's just kind of getting a level of consistency that's going to take time to develop, but all the same, it's important to kind of take a look at who's really succeeding and thriving for this team. Obviously, some of these measures are going to be less helpful right now just because we're still working with a very limited sample size, but you can see some very early trends developing so far. And, we're going to be taking a look at expected goals for percentage, how the Jets are kind of generating shot share on the ice, which players have been on the ice for a lot of good things, and which guys have maybe conceded a few too many opportunities. Now, you might be wondering how the top line's been doing. The top line for the Jets has been kind of a mixed bag ever since Ehlers went out. Scheifele is rocking like a 43% expected goals for share, which is, it's a little bit on the lower side because individually he's still creating a lot of offensive opportunities, but his line and, whenever he's on the ice, his on-ice expected goals against has been around almost 13 goals, which is quite a few opportunities. It probably suggests that Winnipeg is surrendering a lot of high danger chances when he's on the ice. That does tend to track. I mean, the first line over the past few years hasn't exactly been a shutdown defensive unit, and Kyle Connor doesn't really help defensively with that either. Intriguingly, Kyle Connor's on-ice expected goals for percentage is at around 49%, which is just about break-even. For a talented goal scorer who generates as many opportunities as he does, I think that's fair enough. The thing that you kind of notice with this team is that the top six is generating most of the expected goals opportunities, but, in terms of like the rest of the team, the Jets aren't getting a ton of offensive contributions from the bottom six. Now, there are some exceptions, but, Wheeler, Scheifele, Perfetti, to a point, Appleton, and Pierre-Luc Dubois have been doing most of the heavy lifting, Kyle Connor as well. And, it's been, again, a bit of a mixed bag. I think one of the biggest frustrations for the Jets is that defensively, they're improving in some areas, but like the blue line tends to exchange a lot of dangerous opportunities, and Winnipeg's forwards are still learning how to track back and how to defend better, shut down those passing and shooting lanes. But like that's not really a hallmark of the first line. So I think what you see like 42%, 43% expected goal share for the first line. It's not really surprising. Appleton has definitely had a tangible impact on this unit, and it's not been for the best. Appleton's individual, contributions have been relatively underwhelming for a player asked to join the first line. And it's not like it's his fault. I mean, he's just a guy who's been traditionally like a third or a fourth liner, and now he's being asked to try and match up against a lot of the league's best talent. And that's very difficult to ask of a player who, again, much of his experience has been depth deployments. Now, I think if you want to solve this potential issue, there's one player from the bottom six who's really had an impressive start to the season, and that is Sam Gagner. I know we've talked about him before, but when you look at his expected goal share, he's rocking around to 61%. Now, look, he has played like 140 minutes, which is quite a lot different than Scheifele's 222. And even he's played like 48 minutes less than Cole Perfetti. So, it is pretty notable that Gagner's minutes have been more limited, but in those minutes, he's created, or at least been on the ice for around 6.6 expected goals for, and for a little over 4 goals expected against, which is pretty darn solid for a player asked to provide a depth scoring role. Gagner has recently been promoted up alongside Lowry. Lowry has actually very similar figures. You're looking at around 6.5 goals expected for, and around 5 goals expected against, which, for the Jets, when you're looking at all of these accumulations of opportunities and expected goals generated with these players on the ice, if you're over 50% and you're kind of punishing your minutes pretty well, that's great. I think the one thing with Lowry is that his individual shot contributions tend to be limited. But the thing with him, though, is that when he's on the ice, he brings like a really bulldozing forechecking presence. And so his line with Gagner and more recently Axel Janssen-Fjallby tends to dictate the slot opportunities, kind of drive offense around the net, and that's why I think those line members tend to have really good expected goal contributions. Now, you're also kind of seeing relatively low expected goals against, which is pretty good because it means that defensively they have tried to limit opportunities going up the ice. And in general, the third line, I think by maintaining possession further up the ice and also being effective on the track back and really being physical inside the defensive zone, the Jets have a really working, functional, solid, two-way third line. I think the challenge is kind of squeezing out actual offense out of this unit. None of these players, except for Gagner, are natural scorers. And so when you look at their box stats, it's a little bit underwhelming. Lowry has, recorded some shorthanded opportunities. Janssen-Fjallby scored his first goal recently, but Gagner has been the one amongst all of them who has most consistently been contributing on the power play and at even strength in terms of box scoring. So there's a lot to work with here in terms of quality depth lines that can be defensively resolute. But when you're looking at the rest of the team, a lot of the forwards in terms of expected goals for generation haven't been doing a ton. Dubois has had a solid start to the season, but defensively his line hasn't been great with Wheeler and Perfetti. Cole and Wheeler are doing an okay job of keeping up. You can kind of see Perfetti doing a lot of the defensive work on that line, but again, because of the dangerous chances that their lines have been conceding when they're being paired mostly with Morrissey and Pionk together, it's kind of a recipe for rough shifts. And defensively, the top six has kind of suffered because, if you're playing with Morrissey and Pionk, that pairing tends to be very high event. You might create a lot of dangerous chances on the counter, but you're also going to concede even more. So that's something that I think Winnipeg wants to work out. It'll improve once Ehlers returns, but defensively, I think that's still going to be something of a black hole for this team. Now, obviously, the forwards, it's been a little bit of a mixed start, but I think it starts to get really stark when you look at the defensive arrangements and how Winnipeg's blue liners have been doing, because there have been some guys who have really excelled and some players who are frankly swimming. We'll talk about which players have kind of dominated expected goal share and whether it's something we can read into in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did want to shout out our friends and partners at betonline.net. BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting info, stats, news, analysis, and more. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. They've got everything from football to basketball, soccer, ice hockey, esports. If you're into auto racing, F1 season is wrapping up, so obviously a lot of folks have really been tuning in. There's also, of course, NASCAR, IndyCar, GT, whatever you're into, Triple Crown horse racing if you like that stuff. But if you want to change your pace and you want something that's not sports, they've also got Vegas casino games. And, if you're looking for stuff that's not just betting as well, they've also got things like sports podcasts, news articles, and all of the analysis you can handle. It's also, again, the fastest and easiest way to jump in and get online betting into your repertoire. So if you're ready to get started, head on over to betonline.net to register for a free account right now, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We're taking a look at some of the current expected goal leaders and players who are maybe not leading in the right categories for expected goals, especially those who might be surrendering a lot of opportunities, trying to figure out which players have been on the ice for the most positive contributions and which guys have maybe struggled. Obviously, we just talked about Scheifele having a pretty negative looking expected goal share, partly because offensively, he's still elite at creating stuff, and he's been one of our clear play drivers this year. But when it comes to defensive coverages and also being on the ice at the same time as guys like Morrissey and Pionk, you've kind of noticed that the dangerous chances against have started to stack up. But we've already kind of gone through some of the main forward contributors. In just a moment, we're going to take a look at some of the key D on this team and how they have been doing this season. Before we go any further, though, I do want to make you aware of another podcast that I think you should make your second listen of the day, and that is Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, Locked On Sports Today helps you go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with our local experts who provide the analysis that only Locked On can give you. You can subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on all of your favorite podcasting platforms, and as always, it is free, so do so right now because, as always, we really love and appreciate your support. Now, checking in at Winnipeg's defense, obviously, again, same caution when talking about expected goal differentials this early into the season. Goals above replacement is another measure that I think is very helpful. And, for the Jets, obviously, you can imagine guys like Scheifele and Hellebuck have been really massive there. But, at a micro level, you might be wondering which players have been on the ice for the most positive plays, and the defense has been something of a rough patch. There are a couple of players who have stood out the most. Stanley and Sandberg are both at above 50% in expected goals goal share percentage, but the main reason for that is most likely that both of these guys have been spending a lot of time with Dylan DeMello. DeMello has been over 50% as well, and that is a testament to him being able to really help sort of chaperone the young rookies, help them work through their kinks, and also be a really effective top four D-man in his own right. Whenever he's played with Morrissey has really excelled and kind of been allowed to really express himself in Bones' system. But away from DeMello, Morrissey has had a tougher start to the year, in part because his partner, Neil Pionk, has been on the ice for the most dangerous opportunities and the highest expected goals against of any Jets skater. Pionk this year is rocking a 43% expected goals percentage, and he's certainly capable of creating a lot of opportunities. That really isn't in question. He's been on the ice for about 12 expected goals for worth of opportunities and chances. The problem is he's been on the ice for around 15.7 expected goals against, which is pretty crazy. You can tell that this is a player who is extremely high event at both ends of the ice. And if you've watched his shifts, you can kind of track that, right? A lot of his turnovers and mistakes tend to happen in the slot where, if you're looking at expected goals against, that is where you're going to see the most dangerous opportunities reflected on a pretty continuous basis. And he does it often enough to where he's been on the ice for 73 high danger scoring chances against, which I believe is the most among all of Winnipeg's defenders. He's also been, on the ice for plenty of dangerous opportunities for. It's just nowhere near the number of opportunities against. Um, and that tracks with what you're watching out there. I mean, every time he passes the puck or gets caught and makes a turnover, it's usually right in front of Hellebuck, which is, again, the most dangerous part of the ice. So you can kind of align this stuff. As far as the rest of the players are concerned, Morrissey, uh, again, I just gave the disclaimer that because he's been playing a lot with Pionk, his numbers don't look so gaudy. He's not doing nearly as poorly in terms of chances against, but it's not been a smooth ride either. He's looking at around 14 and a half expected goals against worth of chances, which is quite a bit. Um, the pairing that I think probably has surprised people the most, though, is Dylan Schmidt. Both are around break even. Schmidt's a little bit less. Nate has spent, I don't know if he's really spent any time this year with Pionk, but in previous seasons he did play a decent amount with Neil. And, Dylan, since joining Schmidt, has been a really stabilizing force. That pairing has been around break even in scoring opportunities for and against. But it's allowed Schmidt to be more active and aggressive and carrying the puck, which is exactly what the Jets want, and it's what they've been asking for. So, if Winnipeg can find a way to get back to having most of the players at or around break even in terms of expected goal share, I think that's acceptable. The defense doesn't have to be perfect. What you want them to do is to develop traits and habits where they're carrying the puck more frequently, they're jumping into the rush, they're assisting the forwards, and they're learning to manage the puck better. I think you'll see a lot of improvements across the board, especially when it comes to chances against, if the Jets are better at maintaining puck possession, not turning it over as much, and limiting the amount of times that they're passing it to opposing skaters or turning it over right in front of Hellebuck. Uh, I know that it sounds really kind of trite because these are very obvious things, but they're problems that the Jets really haven't resolved. And so obviously there's a lot of room for improvement. But the season's still young. Winnipeg has just started, and these are relatively small sample sizes. I think they're actually decently accurate to what I've seen so far, but we want to give, of course, Winnipeg time to continue improving the systems and getting guys on board. At least from that perspective, I think the Jets are on the right path. I think where their headspace is at makes a lot of sense, and there is a clear plan for how to progress. So I'm pleased so far with the start. I think the Jets have done a good job. I'd be curious to know what you're thinking about how Winnipeg has started. Which of these contributors have you been most impressed with? Which ones have really underwhelmed you? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Before we go any further, though, and talk about Winnipeg's upcoming schedule, I just wanted to let you know about one other fantastic sponsor that we've got for this evening. Today's episode is also brought to you by SimpliSafe. If you've thought about securing your home with home security, but you've been putting it off, you'll want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Jets listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. You might be wondering why I'm recommending it to you. I have, obviously seen quite a few home security systems out there. I've used ones like ADT and stuff previously, and, a lot of them have some pretty good features, but none of them have some of the great features like SimpliSafe's advanced technology, their mobile app support, and their 24/7 monitoring agents who are plugged into your system and can help get first responders on the scene in the case of an emergency. The SimpliSafe app allows you to view crystal clear HD security cam footage, whether you're at home or away. They also have a great setup of high-tech sensors, and they also use fast protect technology, which allows them to identify evidence of threat and then decide which of those threats are legitimate and which ones require response from police, from firefighters, whatever first responder they want to have on the scene. They've got all of the tech they need to help protect your home and make sure that they're bringing the right folks around. And best of all, those 24/7 professional monitoring service agents cost you less than $1 a day to maintain their excellent level of security. That's less than half the price of ADT's traditional, professionally installed system. Right now is your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl today. Again, this is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Hello, Winnipeg Jets fans. Welcome back to these closing quick thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. We're just going to run through a couple of Winnipeg's next few games. The Jets are obviously facing some decent teams. Their first opponent this Thursday, though, should be a relatively easy matchup against the Anaheim Ducks. I think that this is one of their softer opponents as of late, which is kind of nice to have a slightly easier matchup after going through the Flames, Stars, and Kraken in relatively short order. I think the Jets should definitely get 2 points out of this game. It would be disappointing if they didn't. It's a home game. They've had some rest, and the Ducks are not particularly good. Now, after that is where I can start to see the Jets struggling a bit. They're going to welcome in the Penguins and the Hurricanes on Saturday and Monday. A little bit uneven this. Their record currently is not great from what I understand. They are they're almost at the bottom of the Metro Division with a 6-6-3 record, but it is a little bit deceiving. One of the biggest issues is that the goaltending and defense haven't really been great, but in terms of goals for, they have been among the top scoring teams in the Eastern Conference. So this is not a team that I think the Jets can really sleep on. The Penguins have always been a very competitive opponent anytime the Jets have played them at home or on the road. Winnipeg has managed to prevail against them in a couple of matchups, and I think this year more so than other years, I feel better about this matchup. I think the Jets might be able to do some damage. And with the Penguins kind of having, again, a bit of an uneven start, this is a good chance for Winnipeg to at least scratch out a point. If that's all they get out of it, I'm fine with that. 3 out of the first 4 points of those 2 games, that's totally acceptable. That's a great points percentage. And it gives the Jets, a nice starting record. Now, the game that I would really love for them to at least scratch out a point in the most is Carolina versus, the Jets. The Hurricanes this year are a pretty beastly team. I think they just beat a very good opponent pretty recently. They ended up beating the Oilers like 7-2 recently, but you look at their record, and it's actually a little more uneven than I recall. They ended up shutting out the Hawks yesterday, but previously they lost to the Avs, they lost to the Panthers, and they lost to Toronto. So past couple of games, a little bit uneven. They've taken advantage of really weak teams, but it seems like maybe they've had some rougher patches against some of the more quality squads. That does not mean that the Jets are going to be one of those opponents that can steal points off of them. I think you have to remember this Canes team is very deep and very skilled. And so, kind of the same thing that I said about the Panthers or about the Penguins, the Jets need to be really careful, be on their best behavior. I think Winnipeg has a good chance to take 4 out of 6 points. That's my prediction. I think they might be able to force overtime against Carolina and Pittsburgh, but I think beyond that, it's tough to predict them winning. Now, they are at home for these games and they've had some rest, so maybe this is a good chance for the Jets to really flex their muscles and show off. But they definitely have to win the Ducks game. That's not a debatable thing. Beat the Ducks and then go from there. If they lose to the Ducks, then well, you better beat Pittsburgh and Carolina. But do yourself a favor, have a strong game on Thursday, and enter the weekend ready and rested for what will be 2 of the tougher opponents that they face this year. I'd be curious to know how many points you think the Jets will take from these games. Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter. Hello, folks who might have just dropped out briefly. I was just saying, let me know your predictions for how Winnipeg might do over these next 3 games in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. It features the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and our famous take of the day. It's available in all of the favorite podcasting platforms you listen to already, so be sure to like, follow, and subscribe right now. And as always, thank you for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.